How's it going, guys? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, coming to you guys here on day 2 of free agency, or the tampering days of free agency. It officially starts tomorrow, the new league year, which officially starts free agency. But in these last 2 days, there's been a lot of crazy moves. Hopefully, you guys have been able to regroup and get to know all these moves that have been going down. There's been a lot that have flown under the radar. And in today's episode, I'm going to try and go over some of that with the other stories I have in store for you guys today. One of them being the Panthers and the voices going around saying that they didn't put Bryce Young in a situation to succeed. I'll go on to that. I'll talk about Chris Jones's record deal that he signed with the Kansas City Chiefs before the first day of free agency. I know it seems like forever ago, but with all the deals that have been going on, but I wanted to touch on that. Then in the other half of the show, I'll regroup and I'll recap some of those free agent moves that I wanted to get to and I thought that were significant. A lot of big deals and a lot of players moving over to different teams. And to wrap up the show, I wanted to talk about the Vikings. A lot has been going on with them. They made a lot of moves, a lot of new additions to their team, but as well, they also lost Kirk Cousins, which is a huge piece. And I wanted to pop up the question, are they better or are they worse now in terms of the additions, the departures? All that is coming up on today's show. A great show planned for you guys today. And before I jump into the first segment, as always, I want to remind you guys, if you have any questions, any comments that you want to make during the live show, to please use the tip and donations link running across the ticker below me. The tip and donations link is gsmcpodcast.net. Again, the tip and donations link is gsmcpodcast.net. This just makes sure I'm able to see your question over to my right on the chat box. It's a lot more fun, in my opinion, if you guys are commenting, engaging with whatever I have to say, agreeing, disagreeing with it. It's all welcome. It makes the show a lot more fun, and it's a huge help for the show if you're able to also donate, not only this show, but for all the shows across the network. And it's greatly appreciated every time you guys are able to do that. But in saying that, I can jump into the first story, the chip shot story of the day, being about Bryce Young and the Panthers. I read an article, and there's been more reports about it now. More people have touched on it, that Bryce Young and the Panthers, specifically the team, the organization, didn't create the ideal environment for Bryce Young to thrive in his rookie year. And sources, ESPN David Newton, said that a source said Bryce really didn't stand a chance, said a source with direct knowledge of what was going on over there in Carolina, according to ESPN's David Newton. And my initial reaction for what I think about just that statement, he didn't stand a chance. The Panthers, not really the ideal scenario for him to go to. And right off the bat, my initial reaction is, isn't that what all first round, or first pick, I should say, quarterbacks or players kind of go into? Depending on who the team is, it's usually always, or it's supposed to be, the worst team getting the best player in the draft, to create more equilibrium with all the teams in terms of skill level, ability, and stuff like that. They get the first pick. So to bring in the player, to think this team was in a position where Bryce was going to succeed right away and have a type of year that CJ Stroud did have, I think is a little far-fetched, because I think just looking at the two teams before they were drafted, I would probably say that a lot of people had the Texans being the better team overall than the Carolina Panthers. Just before CJ Stroud got there, they had Davis Mills, this being the Texans, but they also had Nico Collins. I know Devin Singletary was still there, but other than that, they had Nico Collins. Dalton Schultz was signed last year, so he technically didn't play enough games with them to see what he really was with them, but he was signed. Then you had a defense that had some good players on it, and then there were some that you weren't really too high on just yet. Derek Stingley was there. Still very young in the league, but he was a high prospect that was drafted by them. Steven Nelson and all these other players like that, Blake Cashman, they were solid players, but you didn't really know what they were going to be. But compared to the Panthers, you look at them and you see Brian Burns. Okay, they brought in Adam Thielen, but then other than that, you can't really name a standout player that was on the Panthers, and it's having that and then seeing how it all turns out. In my opinion, I'm not too surprised because of all that I just said, and in terms of just the Panthers situation hasn't been good, so to say, for a lot of years now consecutively. Probably since Cam Newton, if you're being really honest, they haven't been a very good competitive team. For a kid like Bryce Young to come in, regardless of how successful he was in college with Alabama and how good he was, you can only do so much with the team that the Panthers put out there. And then just reading down further in the article, it said that David Newman continued to report on it, and he said there was a difference in philosophy between Frank Reich, offensive coordinator Thomas Brown, and O-line coach James Campen. And if you're put yourself in Bryce Young's shoes, if you're coming in, you already don't know really what's going on in the NFL. You have to know through experience to kind of develop your routines, develop the kind of relationship you have with these coaches, with the fellow players in the locker room. You have to develop into that leader to command the offense like most good quarterbacks in this league develop into. You have all of that on your plate, and then on top of that, you have the head coach saying one thing in your ear, the offensive coordinator saying something completely different or just slightly different, and then the O-line coach maybe not communicating directly with the quarterback, but with the offensive line, potentially communicating something else pretty differently or slightly different. All of that is just a recipe for disaster for Bryce Young. There's no way he could have had any right frame of mindset to focus on football and focus on developing if he has 2 to 3 different guys telling him different things, focusing on different things, and him not really sure where to allocate all of his attention to, where to get better at, because I think he is a good player. Just Dave Canales, the new head coach now this season, has said that, it's really his mentality, the kind of character that he is, in big games, small games, regardless of the games, he said that he always had the same expression. He was very cold-blooded, were his words, just from the initial interactions that they've had just this season. And I do believe that. I've seen him in college have great games, have just really good performances because of his ability, because he's not the biggest guy. I think it has forced him to elevate his abilities a little bit more. And I was disappointed with how he played, but, with all these reports coming out, all the coaches saying different things to him, offensive line not great, they don't have a lot of weapons. Thielen turned out to be a very good player, surprised a lot of people early on, but then he kind of died off, and you didn't have a number 2 receiver really at all to kind of take the weight off of Adam Thielen. And already Bryce Young was feeling pressure just trying to find Thielen. Once you take him away, it got very ugly. And overall in the season, Bryce Young finished with less than 60% completion percentage, threw for 2,800 yards, 11 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. And the Panthers went 2-15. Frank Reich was fired after 11 games where they won 1 game and lost 10 of them. So take all that I just said, wrap it up, and then add on that the head coach is now gone and you have another guy coming in to try and implement some ideas to just get you guys through the rest of the season. And at some point you have to think, if you're Bryce Young, you don't want to say it, but it's realistic to think that he might have just checked out with the kind of success that they're having. At some point, I would probably assume probably by the 10th game, maybe even earlier than that he just realized, this isn't the situation. A lot of players probably realized that. If not Bryce Young, then maybe other veteran players that have been there, they're starting to believe, this is how it goes every year. So we kind of are used to not being in any sort of playoff contention by this point anyways. Let's just ride it out and just continue like we've always had. And Bryce Young's out there trying to prove himself, and you have all these guys not really in the right frame of mindset. It's all not adding up to a successful team. And I know other players, quarterbacks that were drafted number 1 overall have had similar situations in bad teams, but it hasn't really been reported too much as this one has, or I haven't been engaged enough back then to see it. This is like the first time where you're seeing Bryce Young on these reports coming out about him, and the attention being put on the organization more so than him. Because I think a lot of people have agreed with what I'm saying. They don't believe Bryce Young's just a bad player. If these reports are coming out, a lot of the attention is going on the Panthers, and a lot of pressure will still be on them until they get it right. Now they're transitioning over to Dave Canales, a new head coach. It's his first time being a head coach, and he kind of rose through the ranks pretty quickly. He had a great season last year. He got the best out of Baker Mayfield in their offense, but at the same time, how much of it was scheme, how much of it was the talented players that they had on offense, because Baker's a good player, already has experience in this league. Bryce is just going into his second year, so how is that dynamic going to work with Dave Canales not trying to work with Bryce Young? Compared to the Bucs, you have Mike Evans, who is an all-time great receiver, Chris Godwin, who's a solid number 2, Rachaad White, who stepped up a lot this year and had almost like a breakout year, if you want to qualify it as that. But the Panthers are way below that kind of skill level, and they have players, Chuba Hubbard, Miles Sanders, but they're not really up to par with the kind of skill set that's around the league right now. They both failed to average 4 yards per carry. Thielen was the only receiver to have more than 550 yards at 33 years old. Barely had 550 yards, and that's really nothing when you're thinking about a good bona fide wide receiver one. That, to be honest, 550 yards is what you would expect out of a number 2 receiver, maybe a number 3 receiver, and Thielen was the best one. He was supposed to be a number 3 and number 2. You're expected to have a better one, but that wasn't the case, and now they're at this point, and they don't even have a first-round pick next year, so how's that going to work? You expect them to be more active in free agency. You hope to see that for Bryce Young's sake, but at the same time, how much better can they get? They can only get better, honestly. Being very honest, they can only get better. It's going to be very hard to be worse than what they were. But what's going to quantify success for Dave Canales and Bryce Young to really invest in this project that you have going on right now? Because you don't have a first-round pick, like I mentioned. You traded it to the Bears, and now they have it this year again because the Panthers had the worst record. The Bears have the number 1 pick again. So you're already handcuffed that way, but you do have the chances of going after someone in free agency. They haven't really signed a wide receiver or skill position player yet, but they have beefed up that offensive line, signed Robert Hunt, and I know they signed another guard. I just can't remember his name. So that's good. That's positive to see, but you need a lot more than that. I expect them to be a bit more active, maybe trying to trade for a guy like T. Higgins. I don't know how much value you have to trade away, but that's a good sign. If you can pay him a lot of money, which the Panthers do have, he would fit in great with Bryce Young, and then maybe try and draft a guy in the second round if that works out well for you. But that's kind of where it's all at with Bryce Young. Not surprised that it didn't work out, because if you really look at this team, how could you tell me you expected anything differently? It is just a bit surprising, I think, for a lot of people to find out now, some of these things from a source saying he never stood a chance. That's always going to catch headlines, and I think that's why it's gotten a lot more attention. But it does hold some truth. But again, you can't be surprised by it, quite honestly. So the Panthers have a lot of work to do. I do have faith in Bryce Young. I do like Dave Canales, but you do have to see how he goes through his own growing pains as the season goes on in his first year being a head coach. But anyway, that allows me to move on to the second topic, or I should say the first break of the show. And then after the first break of the show, I have a lot more stories to get to with you guys. The Chris Jones record deal with the Kansas City Chiefs, keeping him around for another 5 years. A recap of some of the other moves in free agency that have happened, some pretty big ones. And then towards the end, more of a discussion topic about the Vikings and how good are they really now, a day removed from free agency, losing Kirk Cousins but getting a lot of other players on the defensive side. So don't go anywhere. You're not going to want to miss all those stories coming up on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? everybody in the world now. Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world now? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world now?
Back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network, diving into our second topic of the show, looking more at Chris Jones' record deal with the Kansas City Chiefs. This really happened before the start of the tampering period yesterday, before Monday. The Chiefs got this deal done, or they were set to have this deal basically wrapped up before these last few days, over the weekend really, and the deal wasn't signed until I think just yesterday or maybe even Sunday. But regardless of that, Chris Jones is staying even longer with the Kansas City Chiefs. They were able to get him back on a 5-year deal worth 95 million, 95 million being guaranteed, and all the money basically it's in the first 3 years, with 95 of that being guaranteed, and then the other 2 years I'm sure there's stipulations or clauses in there where, you know, in 3 years he's going to be 32 years old, so I'm sure there's some clauses or stuff like that, stipulations where they could opt out of it, where it won't cost them a lot of money. But it is officially a 5-year deal, and once that contract was signed, Jones became the highest paid player ever based on annual salary for a defensive tackle or a defensive line player, surpassing Nick Bosa, who was at $34 million per year, Aaron Donald at $31.5 million per year, and more on the numbers. The $95 million guaranteed is the fourth most money guaranteed money for a defensive player. Nick Bosa has $119 million, the most guaranteed money. Then it's Joey Bosa at $102 million guaranteed, then Myles Garrett, and then Chris Jones follows them up at $95 million guaranteed. So a lot of money for Chris Jones, but he is one of the players that definitely deserves it, just based on this past year and going back to last season as well. He played on a 1-year deal, and he still produced 10.5 sacks, which is a decent amount for a defensive tackle, you know, with all the double teams that he faces, especially in the middle of the D-line. I always think, you know, they just get almost double teamed regardless because you have the center and at least one of the guards at least pushing off for you or just helping out, shadowing you a little bit. So they're always facing that double team, and Chris Jones to produce double-digit sacks in a year where he had to on a 1-year deal. And I take that back. When I say he had to, I don't mean that, because he was already very good with the Kansas City Chiefs, so I don't think he was proving anything, but not proving anything, but just reassuring everybody that this is the kind of production you're going to get. 10.5 doesn't seem like a lot really for the kind of player that Chris Jones is, but 10.5 is a lot for another defensive tackle of a different caliber than Chris Jones to produce that kind of number. Any other defensive tackle would have that season, and you would have everybody saying, oh, like they had a great year, a record year. But for Chris Jones, I don't think that's a record kind of year. I think that's kind of what you expect from him. And the Chiefs seem to agree, gave him this big contract for him. And a big topic of discussion with the Chiefs and Chris Jones and just free agency was how they were going to handle this. And another potential free agent in L'Jarius Sneed. It begs the question now, with Chris Jones getting all this money, does this mean the end for L'Jarius Sneed? I think there's still a glimpse of hope for the Kansas City Chiefs to maybe work out something with L'Jarius Sneed. Maybe you work out a short-term deal or just promise him and convince him that if he plays on the franchise tag next year, you'll guarantee to get something done. Maybe he accepts that, maybe he doesn't, but that's one way, because a lot of reports just say if they can't work out a long-term deal, both sides have agreed to trade L'Jarius Sneed for his benefit. The Kansas City Chiefs don't want to do him wrong. So to do right by him, they'll trade him, try to find a trade partner. And, I don't think the Kansas City Chiefs have a lot of money left over to not only sign L'Jarius Sneed to probably the kind of money that he has. He probably wants to be at least a top 5 paid corner just based on annual salary. That would be my guess on just the kind of season that he's had, the kind of season that he's been having, the pivotal roles that he's played for the Chiefs, and not just the playoffs, but the whole season. It all makes sense for him to want that money. I agree that he should get that money, and because the Chiefs just signed Chris Jones, I don't think it could get done. That's just my opinion. I'm sure they're in constant communication with him, and it's only his second day of free agency, so this could carry on for a little bit because he is franchise tag, so they don't have to trade him. They told him that he would trade him, but they don't really have to if the value's not there. So that could always happen. He could just stay, not be happy about it, but that's, they're not guaranteed to trade him, is what I'm trying to say. And on top of it, this was really the only sort of business that the Kansas City Chiefs had to do. And I think if you had to choose between L'Jarius Sneed and Chris Jones, I'm sure they would have, and they did, want to re-sign Chris Jones back. They did so now, and they're able to sacrifice L'Jarius Sneed if they have to, because they have Trent McDuffie, who is prospering into this very good lockdown corner, very young corner, and they've drafted corners in the last 2 to 3 drafts already in the past, sort of, playing along or thinking that this could be a scenario where they could lose L'Jarius Sneed. And now they're at this point, but they already have the supplements and backup corners if they do need to throw one of them in, if they can't find another one through the draft or free agency to replace L'Jarius Sneed. So the way that the Kansas City Chiefs have been doing business, for general manager Brett Veach to do this sort of business, as well as Andy Reid and playing a role in it, I think it's very applaudable and very good by this team, this front office. And it just sets the standard, really, overall thinking big picture with this team. You wonder why they're always in the playoffs or why there's never really a drop-off like there should have been this year, a lot of people would say, with the lack of wide receiver talent that they had on their team. This is the kind of stuff that prevents all of that breakdown from happening. You have a great general manager, great front office, great owner to get these deals done before free agency, because you really never know what's going to happen once your players talk with other teams, what kind of money they'll be thrown at them. Because honestly, if you say you're going to stay with this team, like you're really planning on re-signing with this team no matter what, all it takes is for one team to offer you a crazy deal like they did with Chris Jones, a 5-year, 4-year, $100 million, $90 million sort of deal. And your mind changes pretty quickly after that, in all honesty. So the Chiefs getting their business done before the tampering period starts, before the official start of the new league year, it's just good business by them, and it shows why they still remain at the top. And now if you want to look a little bit forward now, with Jones returning, and with them getting everything done, or just actually one last note on Chris Jones. If anybody still had any doubts on Chris Jones, he's still only 29, and a stat that I found very, very supportive in his case was that the Kansas City Chiefs allowed 4.3 yards per play when Chris Jones was on the field. That ranked first in the NFL. And when he wasn't on the field, they allowed 5.5 yards per play, and that ranked 23 in the NFL. So another thing to just bolster the kind of value Chris Jones brings to this team. One of the eldersmen now on the team, so just from that standpoint as well, you want to have that voice in there. You want to keep that trio together, Chris Jones, Travis Kelce, Patrick Mahomes, the 3 bona fide leaders now, solidified leaders on that team. That means a lot, especially with this team also being young. Other than those 3 guys, a lot of them are in their mid-20s, 27s-ish. I don't think much older than that. So you need not only possibly the greatest quarterback of all time leading your team, he's never going anywhere, but Travis Kelce as well, saying he'll stick around for another year. Chris Jones now guaranteed to stick around. That plays a big part in playoff experience, getting there, being successful in there. and now they're able to keep them around for a lot longer. And that all that three-peat talk, all the talk about another Super Bowl possibly on the way, they're able to secure Chris Jones. Not only does that help that, but honestly, like why would you stop there? I'm thinking like very long term, but it's what have they done to kind of make you think that anybody could stop them in any way? Maybe other teams getting better, that's a good argument, but other than that, they never do anything where you look at it and you're like, oh, how could you not re-sign him? Why did he not get a contract, or why are you choosing him over this other player? They never do something like that. They get their business done and then they can move on to other things, getting better. And I say getting better, that brings me to my next question on this topic. How or where else could they really improve if you really think about it? Their D line is still very good. Chris Jones obviously there. George Karlaftis on the edge as well. They have very good linebackers in Nick Bolton and Will Gay. And they re-signed Drew Tranquil as well at the start of free agency right before the tampering period. So he's coming back. And then in their secondary, like I mentioned, they still have Edwards and Trent McDuffie still being good enough where if you lose L'Jarius Sneed, it's not a huge drop-off. You still have other talented players. And then you go to the offensive side. Pacheco's still there. Travis Kelce's still there. You have Rashee Rice now, who's emerging into your number one receiver. And that's the other position where you could look to improve. Wide receiver or corner are really the only ones you want to look at. Because offensive line, I'm pretty sure most of them are all coming back anyway. They lost Allegretti, but I know they have another one because I'm almost certain that he came in to replace the starter because the starter got hurt in the conference game. So losing Allegretti, yeah, it's a bummer, but you could find another offensive guard backup to kind of fill up that role. And going more over to the receivers and cornerbacks, there's a lot of options, especially in this draft class, which I keep saying is one of the deepest ones in all the positions all around. You could, late first round, draft a defensive back. Depending on who falls, that's just based on team needs. There's a lot of good ones. Terrion Arnold, Quinion Mitchell is getting his name out there. I'm blanking now. Nate Wiggins is another one. Very fast, eye-popping 40-yard dash. He'll raise his stock, but those three guys are the main guys, I think, in my opinion, that would go. Then you have other ones that could fall later in the draft, so you don't have to take them late first if you don't want to. I talked about it yesterday. If you want to go late first, because you don't have a long list of positions to improve on, why not take a stab at wide receiver? I said it. Xavier Worthy makes the most sense, and I'm not going to be surprised. I'm going to come on here, I know I am, after the draft and say that Xavier Worthy is on the Kansas City Chiefs, and it could be potentially the steal of the draft because of his speed. He's a great route runner if you watch any of the games at Texas, and if he was to end up on the Kansas City Chiefs, pair him up with Rashee Rice and all the speed that they already have on that team, it's going to make this offense as close to complete or as close as they had once upon a time back when they had Tyreek Hill. Of course, Xavier Worthy is nowhere near that level yet, but no one knows how good he'll be in this offense. He could fit perfectly and have a great rookie year, or he could struggle. That's always an option, but the Chiefs getting this Chris Jones deal done allows them to think like this now. You can move on from that, forget about it, you know he's there. You gave him the money he deserves, keep him happy to produce, and you can move on to improving this team to make that three-peat dream statement more so of a reality. I think a lot of teams will be favored over the Chiefs. I think a lot of NFC teams will be, but I don't think it'll be a surprise to anybody if the Chiefs are competing in the conference championship against, the Bengals, the Texans, the Ravens, any of those teams. No one's going to be surprised, and if they make it back to the Super Bowl, I think everyone would be silly to bet against the Kansas City Chiefs or Patrick Mahomes. But that's a long, long time away. Congratulations to the Chiefs for getting this deal done and for continuing to set a standard for all these other teams in the NFL. they're at the top for a reason, and that's a big reason why. They get all their stuff done and just keep chugging along, keep this machine going down the line. Probably more success down the line. But in the meantime, while they're planning that out, I'm going to move on with the show. I'm going to send it to another break here. But on the other side of this break and in the other half of the show, I'm going to talk about all the free agent deals that I didn't talk about yesterday. Yesterday was more so the quarterbacks and the biggest deals I think that happened. Now, there are other big deals that happened that I'm going to talk about now and recap them, as well as discussing the Vikings situation. Are they better or are they worse now after the first couple of days? So stick around. You're not going to miss that. You're not going to want to miss that on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Don't go anywhere.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Back on here now to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. The rest of free agency has been pretty crazy. I mentioned it yesterday, the last show that I was on, that the quarterback moves really took precedent over the first day. Russell Wilson going to the Steelers, Kirk Cousins to the Falcons, and then you had Baker Mayfield in there as well, re-signing with the Bucs. All of that took precedent over a lot of deals that are very interesting that took place, and a lot of money thrown around to these players. So before I jump into that, I want to remind you guys one last time, if you have any questions, want to engage with the show, any comments, to please use the tip and donations link running across the ticker below me. If you're not able to see it, the tip and donations link is gsmcpodcast.net. Again, this just makes sure I'm able to see your question. It pops up right here as I'm doing the show, and I can engage with it. It could carry the conversation somewhere else, bring up a different point of view, makes it more interactive and more fun in my opinion. And not only that, it's a big help for the show if you guys are able to donate whatever you can to not only this show, but to all the shows across the GSMC network as well. We greatly appreciate it every time you guys are able to do that. But going back to the free agents, now recapping the rest of the deals, I'm going to list them out, and as I do that, I'll give my 2 cents on the deal, if I like it or not, and what it could mean for the team, the player, and stuff like that. Starting off with one of the biggest deals in terms of money thrown around, Christian Wilkins signs with the Las Vegas Raiders, a 4-year deal worth $110 million, $27.5 million per year, and $84.75 million guaranteed to Christian Wilkins. I wasn't expecting him to go to the Raiders, quite honestly. I heard a lot of things about the 49ers potentially, but they were kind of restricted with the cap and trying to figure out what to do with all their pass rushers. They had to release Arik Armstead because of it. So they were thrown around, but I never really took them serious. Then you had the Houston Texans, who also have a lot of money to throw around. Not very strong at the defensive tackle position. But, Christian Wilkins ends up going with the Raiders. I'm sure they were knocking on his door right away, and they were able to reel him into Las Vegas, and now he forms one of the deadliest duos, most impactful duos, I think, in my opinion, in the league, with Max Crosby on the edge. Not only are they going to be very productive, but honestly for all of us, it's going to be very entertaining. Both of those guys are avid trash talkers. They're always talking on the field. They're always saying something. So those games are going to be entertaining, but more importantly, they're going to be very productive, I think, because Max Crosby already gets a lot of attention on the outside. You can't really send as much as you would want because Christian Wilkins is a very good player for the Dolphins. A lot of times, defensive tackles don't get the love that they deserve because, they play defensive tackle. They're not in the quarterback's face too much. But Christian Wilkins has been a pillar for the Dolphins in their defense. and he's going to not only help the pass rush, but clog up those running gaps for opposing teams. It's going to be awesome to see those two guys. I'm really happy for the Raiders, solidifying that defense even more, and that's going to be awesome to watch. But moving on, another defensive player that got another deal is Jonathan Grenard. He's signing with the Minnesota Vikings on a 4-year deal, $76 million overall, $19 million per year, and $52.5 million guaranteed to him. Another player on the Houston Texans that I was really a fan of. I wasn't really aware of him before this season or in the early part of the season, but you kind of see the success that was building with the Texans. A big reason because of that was his production on the outside. Of course, they had Will Anderson. A lot of attention went to him. But Jonathan Grenard also posted double-digit sacks, if I'm not mistaken, and he's very fast, very quick on the outside. Built a good resume for himself in his final year there with the Texans. Because of that, they weren't able to keep him, or they couldn't agree on a long-term deal that he would have wanted. Now he goes over to Minnesota, and that's a big signing for them because they have Delaney Hunter as an unrestricted free agent, and a lot of people believe he won't re-sign with the Vikings, so essentially Jonathan Grenard can come in and replace Delaney Hunter in that sort of production. He is younger than Delaney Hunter, but Delaney Hunter is still putting up a lot of numbers, so whichever team gets him, they're going to be very fortunate, but at least the Vikings have somebody coming in that can replenish that to some extent. Moving on to another deal on the offensive side, Jonah Jackson, a guard from the Detroit Lions, signed with the Los Angeles Rams on a 3-year, $51 million deal, $34 million guaranteed, and $17 million per year. The offensive line doesn't get a lot of attention in the free agent, alerts and stuff like that. A lot of people scroll past these moves, but I think this is a big one to point out because the Rams were able to re-sign Kevin Dotson, and now having Jonah Jackson on the other side, a good established guard that goes under the radar a lot, I think, but it was a big part of that Lions offensive line that was probably the best in the league last season. If you look at the production of Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, that offensive line was behind all of their success, and I'm sure those guys would say it as well. Jonah Jackson was a big part of that. Now he goes to the Rams, where they're building a pretty decent offensive line. They got to figure out the center, maybe one of the offensive tackle positions, but other than that, they're able to bring him in, establish their O-line a little bit more. They have to protect Matthew Stafford now, obviously more. He is getting up there in age. He's not the most mobile guy, so you have to give him a clean pocket. And the biggest thing for me, it makes me more excited for a guy like Kyren Williams. He had an awesome season last year. I was a big fan of him, watching him play for the Rams. With that offensive line now getting a lot better with Jonah Jackson, I'm very excited for him, and I'm very excited for that skill group of players that they have with Puka, Cooper Kupp still leading the way, and Kyren Williams. I think they're going to be a very fun team to watch next year, and a dark horse in the NFC because I don't think they're being talked about a lot right now. But if they fix up that defense a little bit more, get some more weapons in there, I think there could be a dark horse in the NFC. Right now I'm saying that because I have high hopes for them. Jonah Jackson just solidifies my hopes a little bit more, and that offensive line is huge. Reassuring that is a big reason why I think they'll be good next season. But moving on from one guard to another, Joe Runyan, the guard from the Green Bay Packers, I think he's 26 and one of their best guards or one of their best offensive linemen on their team. He signs with the New York Giants to a 3-year, $30 million deal, $10 million per year, and $17 million guaranteed to Joe Runyan. He gets a long-term deal now with the Giants. Probably my favorite move that the Giants have made, quite honestly. I kind of dumped on them yesterday, I should say, with the decision not to tag Xavier McKinney or Saquon and losing both of them. I really like this move for them because for the longest time now, it seems like the Giants are still trying to figure out their offensive line. John Runyan is a great player. He was very good for the Green Bay Packers. A big reason why Jordan Love had success because their offensive line was very good. Now one of their players moves to the Giants, and he's without a doubt going to upgrade that offensive line. Regardless of who's running the ball, it's going to be Devin Singletary, probably if I were to guess, because he did sign there. And I don't anticipate them finding somebody else to take carries away from him. So they're going to help him a lot with the addition of Jon Runyan. Whoever's at quarterback, again, it's another question if it's going to be Daniel Jones. If it is Daniel Jones, bringing in Jon Runyan, it's good because he's had to deal with a lot of injuries because he's been sacked so much. Most likely that's going to go down with Jon Runyan there. Or if it's another quarterback, a rookie quarterback, solidifying that offensive line obviously is good for their development and getting them protected as well. So the best move the Giants have made, big fan of this one. They still got a lot of work to do. Speaking of the Giants, one of their best players, Xavier McKinney, he signed with the Green Bay Packers on a 4-year, $68 million deal, $17 million per year, and $30 million potentially guaranteed through incentives and stuff like that. Big signing for the Green Bay Packers because they lost one of their safeties, Darnell Savage. He went down to Jacksonville, and now essentially you could argue you get a better player back, depending on who you like better. Darnell Savage was very good with them, but if you're a bigger fan of McKinney or of how he plays, you could say that's an upgrade. I see them pretty much as equal, and for what you're getting with McKinney, I think that's a fair deal to give him. To solidify that secondary with Jair Alexander there, now you add Xavier McKinney, and maybe you can find a better number 2. But other than that, defensively, they're very solid with Rashawn Gary, Kenny Clark still there, Quay Walker in at linebacker. You could find another linebacker to be his partner in the middle of that defense, but overall, they were pretty good last year as a defense overall. They got even better, potentially, if you think he's better with Xavier McKinney. I'm pretty sure they're still going to try and bolster that defense a little bit more, but this was a good signing for them to immediately get a replacement for Darnell Savage. And now, offensively, I mentioned yesterday with Josh Jacobs, he signed with them. If you think he's better than Aaron Jones, could have upgraded their offense. 2 solid moves for the Packers to make sure they didn't get worse. And I like this. I'm a big fan of Xavier McKinney. I think he's going to do great things with them. Moving on, sticking with the Giants still, Brian Burns got traded to the Giants in a shocking move because he was franchise tagged with the Carolina Panthers. The Giants were able to work out a deal with them. They weren't able to get a first-round pick, which is another knock on the Panthers for not getting a first-round pick for either Christian McCaffrey or Brian Burns. But regardless, the trade happened, and the Giants extended Brian Burns to a 5-year, $141 million deal with $87.5 million guaranteed. The Giants, focusing in on assuring the trenches, signed Jon Runyan. Now they get Brian Burns to pair up with Dexter Lawrence and Kayvon Thibodeau. I like the move. It's good defensive-wise. Their defense might be improved depending on how you see this addition. Their secondary is not very good after losing Xavier McKinney. They have Deonte Banks, but he's going to be in his second year. I like this move, just fixing the defensive line, improving that. I'm a big fan of it. But again, they're still in a weird spot where they don't know who their quarterback is going to be, who their skill position players are going to be, how good are they going to be with this defense and offensive line. So, it's good for the future, just upgrading the defensive line to really not make you really bad. But again, it was a shocking move, but it was a good move for the Giants overall. Moving on to some other deals here. Jordan Brooks signed with the Miami Dolphins, 3-year deal, $26.25 million overall. They bring him in to replace Alex Van Ginkel, who went over to the Minnesota Vikings. So a good replacement there. Jordan Brooks was very good with the Seattle Seahawks, so I like the Dolphins addressing that need right away. Another inside linebacker, Azeez Al-Shaair. Big fan of him. He signed with the Houston Texans. He signed with the Houston Texans from the Tennessee Titans on a 3-year deal, $34 million overall. Again, addressing it right away because their linebacker, Blake Cashman, signed with the Vikings as well. So they bring in Azeez Al-Shaair, a good player for the Titans last year, comes over to the Houston Texans and immediately replaces Blake Cashman, keeping that defense pretty whole and pretty good overall. Then Jordan Hicks signed with the Cleveland Browns, 2-year deal, $8 million, because Anthony Walker, the old Browns inside linebacker, signed with the Dolphins, I want to say. I'm almost certain it was with the Dolphins. I could be wrong. It was just a short-term deal. That one, just a 1-year deal. But he's gone, so Jordan Hicks comes in to replace him from the Minnesota Vikings. Arguably their best inside linebacker, so the Browns are getting a good player in Hicks. I mentioned this deal a few days ago. Jacoby Brissett signs with the Patriots on a 1-year deal. Still leaving the door open for a rookie quarterback, but I gave you all the reasons why I really like this move, and now the Patriots finalize it and get it official. Back with the Patriots. Some recognition there of how the organization works, what the standards are. I like the move, but still, it leaves the door open, which is always a good thing, leaving you with more options. So that was a good move by the Patriots. And just to round it all off, before this, or earlier in the day, Joe Mixon was set to be released by the Bengals, but instead they went back on that and they traded Joe Mixon to the Houston Texans instead of being released, and the Bengals right after that signed Zach Moss to a 2-year deal, $8 million. Good deal for Zach Moss. Good value, I think, for the Texans, because Joe Mixon wasn't worth the money that they owed him, I guess is what they were thinking. And now he moves to the Texans. The Texans, after missing out on Saquon and Derrick Henry and all the other running backs, get a good value for Joe Mixon, who's a good player, was a good player for the Bengals, and I think he is a candidate to really break out and have crazy numbers next year in a high-powered offense with the Texans, with C.J. Stroud, Tank Dell, Nico Collins, and all the other guys. I really like that move for the Texans. And the last one I wanted to mention is the Falcons signing Darnell Mooney. A 3-year deal, $39 million, $26 million guaranteed. Adding some more help to Kirk Cousins. Darnell Mooney is a very good wide receiver. He's going to be there to complement Drake London on the other side. Good on the deep ball, good on the intermediate routes. I really like the signing for not only the Falcons, but for Darnell Mooney as well. He goes into a better situation where he might not get a lot of attention and he'll prosper more because of that. The Falcons continue to add to their offense. Really exciting for the Falcons and for all those other teams that I mentioned there. Those were the biggest deals that I thought happened in the last few days, last couple days, day and a half. And, I want to know what you guys think of them. Are there other ones you want me to comment on? And just your overall thoughts on those deals that happened as well. But I can put a pin in that, move on to the final segment or the final break of this show. And on the other side, we're going to have a discussion on the Minnesota Vikings. Did they get better, worse, because they lost Kirk Cousins, or potentially better because they added so many pieces on their defensive side of the ball? Stick around. You're not going to want to miss that conversation on the other side of this break. All that is coming up next. Back here now on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast for the last segment of this show. Are the Vikings better or worse after the first day of free agency? And this topic is very interesting to me because all the value and all the attention that goes onto one position could change this whole conversation and how you feel about it, just if that move happened or if it didn't happen. Obviously, I'm talking about the Kirk Cousins deal, the quarterback position. If the Vikings didn't lose Kirk Cousins or they were still negotiating with him, you could very well say that they got a lot better and you're very excited for this team going forward. All they have to do is sign Kirk Cousins, and this team could be very competitive, not just in their division, but in the NFC North. But because you lose one position, which I think is just crazy, I would really sways how good your team is in the NFL. You lose one position, is if that's the quarterback position, it just changes the whole perspective on all of this. Now the Vikings sit in a weird spot where they don't have that franchise A-tier quarterback in Kirk Cousins where they could really compete in this NFC North. Nobody's really giving them a chance now, and late yesterday or early this morning, they signed Sam Darnold. Wherever you are, depending on your time, is why I say that. They signed Sam Darnold to a one-year deal, and is that going to be their starting quarterback? You know, if you say Sam Darnold is your starting quarterback heading to next year, a lot of heads are going to go down. A lot of morals are going to be very low because Sam Darnold, number 3 overall pick, hasn't really done much in his career, quite honestly, to garner any sort of excitement around him. He played in 10 games last season for the 49ers, threw 2 touchdowns and had 1 interception, and hasn't been, the guy, the number 1 starter on a team since 2022 with the Panthers. And the last game he started was this past regular season with the Rams. In the last game of the regular season, where they sat out a bunch of guys, he had a start. But before then, it never came since 2022. So how is he going to look if he is the starter for the Minnesota Vikings? Of course, they could still trade up in the draft. That's a question I guess I'll start it off with. Does this mean they're the number 1 contender to draft a quarterback now, trade up and do that because they don't have any confidence in Sam Darnold? That's going to be an interesting storyline to see develop. I'm sure they're going to be asked about it any chance that they get, wherever Kevin O'Connell is. And I'm sure they're going to ask him about Sam Darnold and that. But do they need now to go try and draft a young quarterback, a J.J. McCarthy? Maybe not trade up too far, trade up to number 8 where the Falcons don't need one. If you could work out a deal with them, could J.J. McCarthy or Drake May be in your range where you'll pull the plug and just draft one of them? That would be an interesting scenario. Definitely would cost you less than to try and draft one of the top 3 guys, but that's one scenario. Leading into the other scenario where do you feel like you have to do that now because, you don't know how Justin Jefferson is going to react, and everybody in Minnesota will do anything to get Justin Jefferson to sign a long-term deal with them. The money still has to be worked out. Are the Vikings willing and are they able to pay the amount of money that Justin Jefferson is going to want to ask for? No information has come out on that topic, but that now turns into their number 1 priority. You have to know how Justin Jefferson is feeling. That I'm sure that's going to come out over the offseason, how he feels about losing Kirk Cousins. Does he believe in this project that they're building with Minnesota and committing to that project for the major part of his career where he is now really entering into his prime, which is scary to think about because of how good he has been already. He's really, these next 4 to 5 years are really going to be his physical prime that he's going into. Does he think the Vikings have done everything or are doing everything to maximize his potential and get him the most success, the best out of his career? That's a question for him, but that also has to be a question that the Vikings are asking or wondering if Justin Jefferson is all in with them on this quarterback long-term plan. And, how quickly they get that done is going to be a big topic as well. I'm sure they're going to be pushing to get it done really quick, but if this thing drags into next season and into next offseason, you still haven't gone anywhere, you might as well write it off that Justin Jefferson is not going to stay, because all he has to do is see how good they perform in the first couple weeks. If it looks very ugly, it's going to be harder and harder to keep him around just because of the product you're putting on the field. And that's another issue where you could potentially lose him. They want to get a deal done, ideally before the season starts. You lock him in for the whole season, and then if you do bad, you can't really get rid of him if he wants to leave because he did sign that contract. So how quickly they get this done, how quickly it materializes, is going to be a big point in determining if Justin Jefferson is likely to stay or not. And all of that is sort of tied into this idea that I've been pretty negative about it, very questionable about Sam Darnold. Is he going to be good or not? But if Kirk Cousins was still on this team, they signed some really decent players already. Like I mentioned before, they signed Jonathan Grenard to replace Delaney Hunter. He's coming off a great season with Houston. They signed Andrew Van Ginkel, who was a good, solid player for the Miami Dolphins. He was their middle linebacker, along with Jerome Baker. He was also a big part in their defense being formidable. So he's going to replace Jordan Hicks because they lost them, obviously, to the Browns. They also signed Blake Cashman, another linebacker that was very solid for the Houston Texans, performed very well with them, still in a good age range, and he's coming in now to make that linebacker room defense a lot better because you lost one linebacker, but now you bring in two very solid ones. I mentioned they signed Sam Darnold, and offensively they signed Aaron Jones. So just imagine all those guys with Kirk Cousins and how differently everyone would be thinking about the Vikings if they still had a Kirk Cousins or if they signed any of the other guys, maybe Russ. I think people would still be excited if they signed Russell Wilson instead of Sam Darnold or Baker Mayfield. Your whole perspective takes a 180 just because you lose one position, being the quarterback position, and I know that's how it all works. Is it fair? Probably not. Maybe not. You could argue that, but at the same time, I think it's just very intriguing and a very good conversation to have because of this what-if scenario. I'm not taking any blame away from the Vikings. You lay in the bed that you made. You decided to not give Kirk Cousins the money that he wanted. I know it was a lot. Quite honestly, I might not have given him that money because $100 million guaranteed, 4 years, $180 million is a lot. Quite honestly, for a guy that's only won one playoff game in the last, I don't know how many seasons, but I saw today that they were talking about it. He has one playoff win and over the last few seasons, and are you willing to give that sort of money to that guy who doesn't really perform to the level that he has been in the playoffs where it matters most? I saw Stephen A say it somewhere. He has less playoff wins than Dak Prescott. And you think of all the heat Dak Prescott gets. No one talks about Kirk Cousins and the kind of playoff performances that he has with the kind of players that he's had on his team. Stephon Diggs, now Justin Jefferson on his team at some point or another. He's had some pretty good, formidable players to throw the ball to, good offenses and stuff like that. Stephon Diggs, another one. And the playoff success hasn't really been there. So there's that aspect of it from the Vikings side, justifying their decision. But, you put yourself in this position, not give Kirk Cousins the money. And because you waited so long, you were left without any of the other options. Wilson went to the Steelers. Baker re-signed. And now you're kind of looking at the Bears like, so Justin Fields, well, how are we feeling about him? Now it re-energizes the Bears that kind of have a little bit more leverage over the Vikings at least because they are in desperate need of a quarterback because I'm not even too sure they're very honed in on Sam Darnold. If they are, all the best of luck to them, but I can't sit here and believe that they have all the trust in Sam Darnold. So they're going to have to look elsewhere for a quarterback. Yeah, they could try and trade up one for a quarterback, but do they have the value and do they think it's worth it? Maybe you can get better value by trading for Justin Fields, but now that the momentum now shifts over to the Bears a little bit more because, like I mentioned, you have a team that's desperate for a quarterback, whereas before it looked like the Bears were the foolish ones, and because they didn't trade Justin Fields right away, they're stuck now. But now you never know what's going to happen. The Minnesota Vikings are desperate. I think they're going to inquire about Justin Fields. I think they'd be silly not to. I don't think, working out a trade within the division would be smart for the Bears, I mean. But, the Vikings are desperate. Once they offer something, if it's something you can't refuse, regardless if they're in the division or not, if it's something very great, a lot higher than you would have ever thought you would get for Justin Fields, I think you have to pull the plug regardless. Even if he turns out to be amazing with Justin Jefferson and that offense, Aaron Jones there now as well, I think the value that you could get if they surprise you by over offering, I think, a lot of people will take that deal. And it's a lot of what ifs, give and takes with the whole quarterback situation. And it's funny because you thought you'd get a bit more clarity now that all these guys are off the board. But in some ways, you have more questions now, new questions that pop off because of the scenarios that the Vikings are in now. They have a good team to win now and compete in the NFC North, but not having that quarterback could kill you. Just ask the Steelers, the Browns when they got into the playoffs, and any of the other teams. Jordan Love, good player, but inexperienced. It could cost you in the biggest of games. The Vikings know that, and it's going to be interesting to see where they take this team because I'll keep harping on it. They're a good team overall. Defensively, they got better. They might need a corner or secondary help here or there, but I truly believe they're in a win-now mode with this team because they got better. So what's going to happen with the quarterback position? That is going to be determined right now. I don't have the answer for you, obviously because I'm not involved, but also because I have run out of time in this episode. So that's going to do it for this one. As always, I want to give a huge thank you to everyone listening or who tuned in during the episode as well. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Make sure to also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok for more of not only this show's content, but all of the network's content as well outside of sports. If you want to see more of me, though, and more of this show, check out the GSMC Sports Network channel and the Podcast Network channel where I always post YouTube Shorts daily, the individual segment videos of the whole live show. If you missed one segment or want to rewatch one specific segment, you can go back on there and do that, as well as recorded entire live shows that you could go back and rewatch or tune into if you missed a whole episode. Every episode that I do live at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time every day, so tune into that for more NFL and football conversations. I've been your host, Manny Maradiaga, as always. Thanking you guys for tuning in, and I will see you all tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn it.